Welcome today to Lou Sexton. Now, Lou is a book coach. Do you describe yourself as a book coach, Lou? Is that your
Oh, I say I'm editor and a writing coach. And other days I say I'm a writing coach and an editor. It depends what day it is, really.
writing coach and editor? Okay,
Writing
that sounds
coach is
really
what I
good.
like to say.
Now, tell me, Lou, straight in the deep end, what do you love most about your work?
Oh my gosh. I just love it when I love coaching. I love editing, but I love coaching better because I love working one-on-one with writers. And I just sort of love that moment when we're working together and there's that little kind of spark, like say we're workshopping something. And my favorite bit is when we get off a session and they're like, I can't wait, I can't wait to get back into it. That's really, really excited when they, say, do you know what you're going to do now? They go, yes, yes, quick, get me off the call. I'm ready to go. That's really one of my favorite things. Yeah.
We understand now you love doing it, but what led you to coaching and editing in the first place?
Oh, well, I retrained as an editor 12 or 13 years ago. Used to work in theatre and community events and so forth, and, decided to shift things around. So I worked for an editor for a while, and as part of editing, there's two types of editing. There's that close editing called copy editing, and then there's the sort of bigger picture editing, which is called structural editing or manuscript appraisal. And I started doing the manuscript appraisals as a video, as a Zoom, really, like even before we knew about Zoom, as a Zoom discussion rather than a written report. Traditionally, they're like a written report, and you just, you read the book and then you write screeds and screeds of notes. And I decided to play around with just doing it one-on-one with someone as like a kind of workshop
Mm.
in that way that, when I was studying writing and editing, because writing and editing I studied together. And when we're studying writing, workshopping is just such a powerful part of learning to write, learning about your writing. So I kind of brought that into my editing style with my manuscript appraisals. And then I loved it, and writers really loved it. So then I thought, well, how about we could work, I could sort of work rather than just one-on-one with an appraisal, off you go. Here's the ideas, off you go. It's like, why don't you come back and show me what you've done and we'll do some, we can do some more. So, yeah, I sort of developed that style. Actually, I think when I first developed it, was pre-Zoom and I was meeting someone in the Brunswick Library. That was my first writer I'd worked with, and I'd suggested, would she like, he sort of like do a bit of guinea pig. And we used to meet in the library, but then Zoom came along and that made it easier.
What a marvelous idea. I just think that's really brilliant because you have the immediacy of being in the moment and like you said, Sue, I mean you have performance experience. So
Yeah.
this was something that wasn't unusual for you either to be able to bring someone into the moment and interview and do this stuff live because otherwise I imagine it would be quite a disconnected process where it's kind of an email comes a couple of days ago, you spend a couple of days with it, then you get back with your responses.
The copy editing side, you copy edit it all, send it off with copious notes.
So
If you're
that's the
copy
written
editing,
part. Yeah.
you do a notes and say, like, I've suggested this because of that, because
Yep.
copy editing, you're not changing, you're not fixing, you're suggesting.
But the structural part, as you said,
The
is more
structural
that's
part,
taking the bigger chunks and sort of shifting them
yeah.
around into a
Well, you're not even moving them around, you're just
no.
asking questions. So you just
Okay.
might write, so traditionally when it's a report, you might put
Mm.
something like, the beginning feels a little slow. It doesn't really, get into, pick up until chapter 3. Would you consider starting at chapter 3, then feeding a backstory? You might say
Ah.
that, but you've got to say that all in writing. But if you're talking to someone, straight away you can say that, and they might go, but what about this? And you can go, yes, but what about that? Or I haven't thought about that. So
So
it
the
becomes
feedback's
like a
immediate.
workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. That just intuitively sounds to me to be a much easier process of, gathering the idea together and, starting to well, like clay on the potter's wheel, you're sort of molding it together. Both hands are on the pot or the jug or the bars.
Yeah.
Okay. Where's your lane in
Where's
terms
my
of
lane?
genre? Yeah.
My favorite lane is fiction, and my favorite fiction lane is literary fiction. But I also really love genre fiction too. I've done, and I guess I sort of leaned towards literary when I was looking to kind of niche myself down because that's what I read a lot myself. But also, I really love doing genre fiction like romance and mystery and so forth. They can be a little bit more formulaic,
Mm,
but that's kind of good because I've got some of those. I know those tools
yeah.
to help people kind of work out how that formula might
Can
work.
that was useful for you to give me a bit of a sense of what genre fiction was. But tell me a little bit more about literary fiction. I'm not sure if I really understand that term. What does it mean?
Oh, okay. Well, when I first, before I even knew the term literary fiction, remember
Mm.
I used to go to the bookshop and, ask for recommendations, say, I'm more interested in prose than plot.
Ah, so the way
And
something's written rather than what
it's
it's written about. Yeah.
it's maybe, yeah, it can have more time, can be more ponderous. It's not just all about what happens. I mean, it can be all about what
Mm.
happens, but it's not just sort of using that kind of classic three-act structure of, turning the pages to see what happens in the end. And which is not
Yeah.
to say genre fiction doesn't, really like romance or crime or whatever, can still really, really focus on prose and be
Yeah.
very literary. There is such thing as literary crime, but literary
Hmm.
fiction is possibly, like, yeah, just a little bit more kind of more wide open for what you can do.
So as a writing coach and an editor, so how do you preserve the writer's voice? Because it to me that must be one of the potentially one of the difficulties or one of the even one of the objections that people might come to you with is like I don't want you completely changing this around so it doesn't sound like me anymore. And
Absolutely.
obviously that's not something you'd want to do anyway. But how important or how easy is it, and what's the process you go about in preserving or understanding that writer's voice in the
It's
first place?
That's like the number one credo.
Okay.
It really is that the writer's voice, it's their book, it's their voice. You work out how they write and and who they are. And so if you're editing, yeah, you're not kind of suggesting any changes, and or even with coaching,
Mm.
um, what you might do with coaching is help them develop their voice or find their voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I have worked with people that, hadn't really, I mean, it's a tricky thing. And I remember again when I was studying writing, it's like, what's finding your voice? But, when people are starting out writing that they maybe have a way, a style of writing, or maybe they're kind of influenced by someone, but as they get more confident, and this is what you can do as an editor, you can maybe say like, or as a coach, this bit here, this is really strong. This is like how you're writing. Sometimes people kind of maybe in the beginning might try hard to be a little too writerly, perhaps,
Ah.
or they might, yeah, or just might be sort of maybe a little bit more detached. But you can find little pockets. Like I've got people I've been working with where for a couple of years, I've got a few people I've been working with for a couple of years where that's sort of almost been the first step, because in a way I've been teaching them writing skills and they're starting to really find their own voice. But yeah, the
Mm.
number one credo for editing is you don't change a writer's voice. You work within their voice, or you help to amplify their voice, or you let them know when they're kind of going off a little bit off track, and might say, well, this doesn't sound as much as like you as that does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really beautiful way of explaining it. So it's very much it's kind of a conversational relationship building exercise to gradually discover that voice, because it's not just you as the coach discovering that writer's voice, but it's the writer themselves discovering you're building their voice at the same time,
Well,
potentially.
sometimes, yes, if I'm
Yeah.
coaching with long-term people that
Mm.
are coaching that are really kind of starting from sort of base one, like I've got an idea for a
Yeah.
book, I really don't know how to write.
Okay.
Type
Okay.
thing. But
Yeah.
most writers that come to me already have their sort of style of writing.
Mm.
And sometimes it might just, they're not even sure. Sometimes they're not even sure whether it's a good style or whether they like the style. So even just
Yeah.
getting that feedback where I can sort of say, like, I think your voice is really strong, or, amusing, or, love this dry wit here. And they might go, oh, dry wit. I didn't realize I had dry wit, or whatever. So it can be a nice sort of reflective.
Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes when maybe if I'm looking at an extract, say someone sent their 5,000 words, I look at it and I go, oh, it felt a little bit kind of loose, or not quite like you here. And they go, yeah, I was getting tired, or I wasn't sure. So often the bits I question, in a way,
Yeah.
the bits the writer might say, yeah, I really wasn't sure about that. Yeah, I was wondering that too. So it's an interesting kind of,
Yeah.
get
Fascinating.
to know
Yeah.
their writing a little bit better.
Maybe returning back to more, kind of structural aspects of what you do. Like I've heard terms like, and I don't understand many of these terms, and I'm hoping you can help me, but
Yeah.
terms like story arc and
Hmm.
the hero's journey and acts
Hmm.
1, 2, and 3. You sort of
Hmm.
intimated about the acts earlier. So what do these things mean, and how important are they? and are they part of the, where do they sort of fit in the whole writer's journey? Or
I know it's such a great question. And,
thank you.
in literary fiction, wherever you want,
Yeah. Okay.
potentially, but the 3 act structure, I'm going to talk about maybe, if you're reading page turners or maybe even watching movies, the 3 act structure is something we know absolutely kind of sort of implicitly. I'll take a sort of a romance, for example, so
Hmm.
what you might start with is the inciting incident. It always start with that. So there's life as normal, and then something changes it. So that's a turning point there.
Okay.
And we know that, like, children's books, all things. So in inciting incidents, it might be, someone meets someone and they think, that might be interesting.
Okay.
And then, and from that, as the life has changed, and then the protagonist, this is sort of simplified view, obviously,
Yeah.
the
Great.
protagonist might then have a goal. So, in the romance, it might be a goal to, get the person, or,
Hmm.
or not, because not all romances, they start with the goal, or they might have a goal just to change my life. They might be like, my life's really boring. I'm going on a fabulous holiday. I'm going to change my life. But the protagonist has a goal, whether they know it or not. The author
Okay.
knows it, they might not. They're wanting to change something.
Yeah.
And in the way to that goal, there's sort of certain obstacles on the way. And there's a point, and so they overcome those obstacles. And there's sort of, there's so many thousands of different ways you could describe this about
Uh-huh.
character arc, story arc, but ultimately, it will get to the point where they overcome so many obstacles, getting towards the climax. So Act 1 is the inciting incident, sorry. Act
Yes.
2 is reaching up, reaching for the goals up to the climax.
Hmm.
Often there's a sort of all is lost moment at the climax.
Ah, right.
That feeling, it's all too
Yeah.
hard. This is often seen as it's the great character test as well. Like, they have to,
She's found a job in New York, and there she goes steaming away into the sunset
yeah, yeah.
on a
So,
boat,
and they have to
or
kind
on a
of
jet
think,
plane.
yeah, they have to
And then it's, oh my
think,
God, what do I do? And
think,
like, yeah, I haven't got
yeah,
any
and
chance anymore.
the climax is when they get the thing, and the third act is that quick denouement when they were happily ever after.
The
And of course, it
resolution,
doesn't
yeah.
all have to be that, but you can think about, like, once you start watching movies. But when I do explain it to people,
Mm,
I always say think of a rom-com, because everyone has seen at least one rom-com, surely. Yeah, or
yeah,
an action
yeah.
movie, same kind of thing. But there's so many different ways you could, there's that story arc. You can say 3 acts. That could be divided into 5 key turning points. There's a thing called Save the Cat, which is based on the first Alien movie. What's Ripley's task? To save the cat. That's her
Save the
goal.
cat. Yeah, yeah.
So, and there's so many really great resources out there you could look up that. But coming
Mm,
back to your question about how do you help? So some writers I work with are deeply aware of it. They are planners, and they have planned
mm-hmm.
out all the midpoint, the turning point, all the turning points. They know all the things, and they're kind of writing very closely. And that's great. They know where we're going. Other writers, and there's no right or wrong with this, are what's called pantsers, and they're just writing by the seat of their pants. And sometimes, which is great, because when you write by the seat of your pants, you're kind of opening up the world maybe, and things come in and ideas come in. But sometimes when you're writing by the seat of the pants, you can write yourself into a hole. Or so
Ah,
there's a point, or maybe not, but there's a point where it can be helpful to step back and say, okay, let's overlay this structure to what you've done, and understand if this is genre fiction, if this is fiction that is using a 3 act structure. And nearly every book, even literary fiction, the the protagonist does want something.
mm,
So if we just overlay that, it can kind of help people understand where they're going and how they ended up in a hole, or how they
I
can get in
see.
a hole.
So it's
And
back a couple of intersections where you turn right and you go, well, maybe if we turn left there instead of right,
yeah,
then this
yeah,
would allow this development to occur, which would keep the story on the rails rather than sending it off a cliff. But to me, I think the way these things come out of Act Two, where, as you say, they've been through the various struggles, the almost got it but not quite, and how that's snatched, and how they actually introduce it into the conclusion, has got to be kind of, to me, there's a big plausibility kind of issue there. Like, how do you deal with that sort of stuff with an author?
plausibility is a big thing. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I often will, it is something I will, if it comes up, I will question authors about that. Like, how could that happen? Or sometimes it's as simple as, how did she know that? Or how
Yeah,
do they
yeah.
get from there to there? And sometimes the author is so in it, inside it that they haven't thought about that, which is one of those other examples of having that sort of outside eye. And when
Yes.
I'm coaching with someone, and sometimes when we're coaching, it really is just workshopping the next part of the story. And I'll just keep asking them questions. And someone might say, well, how about this? And I go, good, but how did they know that? Or how could she afford that? Or something like that. It might be, just like sometimes I
Mm,
just ask the hard questions and I say,
yeah.
it's not that the reader needs to know all those answers, but you have to know every answer.
That's an interesting perspective, and that's a great segue into the next question, Lou. So, oh, but how did Bob meet Jane? Like that all of a sudden, where did she come from, and what's her backstory, or whatever the case may be? So, is that a useful analogy, the sort of in a movie somehow?
Look, it is. And I think for writers, and actually writers I work with kind of tend to fall into two camps. And one is
Mm,
that they do play in a movie, and the one is that they don't necessarily. So
right.
I talk about the ones that they don't first, sometimes, and the ones that don't sometimes kind of ignore because they're not singing in their head, they ignore kind of important things like setting and where people are. And sometimes when they're not, and I might just ask a question like, what is it, a stinking hot day or is it the freezing cold night? Where are we? They can be a little bit disembodied when they're just thinking,
Ah,
if they're not thinking that in a movie.
yeah.
Those that are thinking in a movie, and so, so I've helped writers like, there's a few writers I've worked with and I just keep saying, watch the movie in your head first, then write it,
Great
and that can be
advice.
really helpful. Some people watch the inner movie so closely they give way too much detail, but that's fine
Ah,
because it's easy to, it's good. You can put all that detail down and then you can strip that out later. So this is all the fine line. It's that great question of, you don't want the narrator popping in too closely and sort of saying, look at this and join all these dots and everything. And did you notice that over there? Did you see how she smiled? It was a happy smile. If the
yeah.
narrator's in there all the time telling you where to look everywhere, it's kind of slightly exhausting for the reader, but also not very enjoyable because the reader doesn't get to do any work,
Yeah.
because they're not able to play their own little inner movie.
One of the obvious divisions when you're reading a book is the difference between the story that's being narrated, so the narrator's voice or the narrator's voice, and then you've got the dialogue. So how does one what are the purposes of these two different sort of
Oh,
well, I
yeah.
don't even know what to call them really, but
Well, yeah, nice.
blobs,
You're talking about narratorial voice or narrative voice,
narrative voice
which is either
versus
like going to be
dialogue. Yeah.
first person or third person. Yeah. So there's a
Oh
narrative.
yes. Yep.
Okay. So that's a choice that a writer is making. And there's, I could talk forever about,
Which
the
one you would
pros and
choose?
cons of each voice.
Sure.
But then, yeah, within that, yeah, it's like when is there sort of description, I think what you're talking about, and when is there dialogue? So
Yes,
that's
thank you.
called
That's a much better
scene
question. Yeah.
versus summary. And it's a great question. So
Hmm.
a scene, if you think about, is where there's dialogue. So if you think about in a movie, they're all scenes, scene after scene after scene. And the key thing about a scene, when you choose to show something as a scene, is something has to have changed by the end of that scene.
Right. This is like a
So, and if
transformation of some kind.
Yeah, because that's what's moving the story on. So if
Hmm.
it was just like Dave and I went out to dinner and had a really nice time and then we went home, I would put that in summary. That's kind of useful information, but nothing has changed. We went out to dinner, we had a nice time. That has not moved the plot along at all. Dave and
Okay.
I went out to dinner and then had an argument, and then I said I'd never talk to him again. That has
That's more
changed.
like it.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, there's been a transformation.
So, or
Yeah.
every scene. So and it's often useful to think about movies when you're thinking about should this be seen in summary. Because if you imagine it, if you just saw a movie and two people went out to dinner and had a chat and then went home, you'd be like, well, unless they had a chat and someone revealed a secret or something happened, but if they just had a really nice time and went home, that wouldn't be a scene.
Mm-hmm.
Or it would be just a tiny little, just a little, almost like montage. It would
Mm-hmm.
just be a little tiny scene. It wouldn't be a full-blown scene. So summary is sometimes great to think about montage.
Okay.
Think about, again, summary. Again, I use the example of a rom-com kind of help because it sort of helps.
Mm-hmm.
The two people meet, and they're getting along well. And then, let's just say they're having lots of fun before it all goes terribly wrong. So there might be the
Harry
first
Met
scene
Sally
of
comes to mind
their
immediately.
first date or what, the first time and it's lovely. And then, there's a little montage. They're having pancakes. They're doing this. They're walking in the park laughing. You'll have that.
I
And so
see what you mean.
maybe they're
Yeah.
at home flipping pancakes. One flips a pancake, sticks on this other one on the other ceiling, and the other one, blows up. Like, what the hell are you doing? Okay, something's gone wrong. Do
Yeah.
you know
Never
what
saw
I
this side
mean?
of you before. Yes, yes, yes.
So
I thought I knew you.
montage is sort of like summary. We had a glorious week together. We did all the fun things. And then you might go into the scene when they were just doing the other one fun thing, but something changed.
I see. Oh, that's
Someone
a
said,
really
I
useful
love you. And
distinction,
the other
actually.
one was
Yeah.
like, do you? You'd probably put
Yeah.
that in a scene if someone said, I loved you, and the other person said, wasn't ready.
Okay. But to me, that classic example when they might be sitting together on the beach and the camera's from behind and they're looking out towards the sunset, and Sally's got some questions. She's sort of got these internal questions. She's having a little bit of a chat with herself about, this Harry guy. Like, I'm not really sure about him, and I know that he was going out with Laura before, but I'm not really quite sure whether they'd broken up or not. So those kind of internal dialogue scenes, do they become are they good characters for a narrative piece within the story where the narrator might be describing what's going on in the
It
protagonist's
really
head, perhaps?
depends on the style of the
Or
writer. So like if you're in first
yeah,
person,
okay.
you're inside their thought. If you're in third person close, where you're inside, if
In
Harry
their
met
head.
Sally, when Harry met Sally, if that were a book, maybe it started as a book,
Yep.
you'd probably have alternating chapters of third person close, where you'd be in third person, or it could be a first person. But if you're in third person, so it's describing from the outside, he did this, she did that, but
Mm-hmm.
you're privy to Harry's thoughts, say,
Yes.
only. And then maybe the next chapter, you might be privy to
To
Sally's thoughts.
Sally's thoughts. And that's called third person close loop. Is that right?
Close, yeah, close
Yeah.
narrative. So rather than
Okay.
hopping around from all different heads, and that,
I
um,
see.
again, I could go on and on. And it's also again about people's style of writing. Some people choose a style where they write thoughts in italic, and they have a constant little sort of dialogue of what is not got dialogue,
Mm,
not quite the right word, but constant little commentary of what is going on in the character's head.
mm,
Other people might just write more distractedly, and it gives the reader more opportunity to try and work out what's going on. But if you see a movie and then there's a narrator over the top, I sometimes it's a little bit lazy filmmaking, I think maybe, because it's
yeah.
not using like a really powerful movie when you're in the movie and you see these two people or many people, someone having a conversation, and you might think, what did she say that for? And what's he doing? And this is where the audience or the reader, is involved. It's like,
Mm,
she say that when she just said that to him and we already know that. Oh my God, is she lying? And this is where the reader
yeah. I see what
or
you
the
mean.
viewer becomes involved.
Yep.
And similarly, I mentioned earlier about the narrator coming and telling us everything.
Mm,
It doesn't leave any space. Like we get that space in movies of
yes,
going,
yes.
I wonder why they did that or what's going to happen now. So it's all about distance, narratorial.
The viewer being viewing an accurate representation of reality versus the viewer being kind of inside the story that's being built.
Yeah,
So becoming part of the art.
like sort of making your own meaning, which is sort of a
There
whole
we
big
go. Thank you.
thing about like the viewer making their own meaning. And
Mm,
yes, to what point as the writer are you going to do you want the reader to make their own meaning? And my contention is always allow them some to a point. It can
yeah.
be claustrophobic if you're in there, and it's a thing that emerging writers often do. If you're in there really
Hmm.
closely, not giving the reader any space.
They're in a vice.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
do.
it's a great point that everybody, there's so many different kinds of readers and there's so many different kinds of writers. And, some genres, like, for example, fantasy and speculative fiction, often are a little bit more close and a little bit more detailed, whereas,
Mm,
because there's a lot of stuff to fill in, whereas often, as I say, literary might be a little bit less detailed. But, yeah, that's why there's so many thousands of books in the world.
Yeah, wonderful,
We're
Lou.
not all writing the same book. That would be boring.
Yes, too true, isn't it? It's the varieties of spice, absolutely. What sort of things do authors, new and old, get stuck with or stuck
Yeah,
on?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, and just on that point, some authors I'm helping develop story, and others I'm just feeding back on what they've already said. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Some are like,
Mm.
help me, what happens next? So somewhere I'm very, very more hands-on, where I'm more in almost like a writing teacher in a way,
Okay.
almost like when you go to study writing and you get the feedback. But
Yep.
probably bulk of the writers I work with, they have, they've built the world and they have the ideas and well, they've all have built the world and had the ideas, but they've
Mm-hmm.
probably got a lot of it there. But one of the key things people can get stuck in, especially if they just come early, is just confidence, actually. So
Okay.
people, I often get a lot of people coming to me just saying, I don't know if it's any good. And in fact, I offer a little service, which is just appraise the first 15,000 words.
Oh yeah.
Rather than me reading 80,000 words, 90,000 words, by the first 15,000 words, I've got enough information about their writing to give them feedback. And, occasionally it's just like, it's great.
That's
This
an
is really
excellent.
fantastic. Usually, like, occasionally there's almost nothing to say. I mean, there's usually a few little things to tweak, but
Sure.
sometimes it's just like, yes, this is really interesting story. I'm really engaged by then. Here's a few sort of technical things you could maybe look out for, but just stay on that path, right? You're going on a great path, which can be really satisfying for them. And others can be, I can always see something. I can see these fabulous characters, but I think maybe the plot, could do with some more fleshing out, or maybe there's a plausibility issue, or
Mm.
maybe there's some technical issues. But um, with whenever I've had someone just send me those 15,000 words, I've never said, "Oh, give up." Because
Yeah, yeah.
it's never been. There's always a gem in there,
I've
and I
got you.
can give them that direction. These are your strengths, and this is what you can work on.
And of course, Lou, some of those writers who've sent you the first 15,000 words, they've already written the next 15,000. And so
Yeah,
to get feedback from you, there's kind of like there's kind of a few, generally speaking, of course, there's a few, that's
yeah,
okay. And I can see those little tweaks. And even if they have written another 15,000, then it's possible that some of those suggestions you've talked about in that first 15,000 may apply to the next 15, and that becomes an
yeah.
editing process for them rather than screw it and start again from scratch kind of
That is
process.
exactly right.
Right.
That's what it is.
Whatever.
It's a way
Yeah.
for them
Who
to.
would, what writer wouldn't want to hear that?
Yeah, it's a way for them to kind of like, look at their work and know what their strengths are and know
Mm,
what they need to develop.
yeah.
And that's
Fantastic.
within the story, within the character, or within their writing skills, or like, for example, there might be someone that's the story's great, but it's like there's no setting. I don't even know
Mm,
day of the not day of the week, but I don't even know whether we're inside or outside, whether it's hot or cold. These kind of things can really make such a difference. They can just add this other layer.
yeah. Yeah.
Maybe the story's great, but it's very disembodied. So that might be,
Mm.
and I can ask them those questions, and then they can start to layer that through.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, what an amazing bit of picture building you do. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Hmm.
Lou, thank you so much. That's been a marvelous insight. Like really, really sure. I know what a writing and book coach does now. A writing coach and editor does.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll look forward to speaking to you again at another time. And thank you so very much for today.